I am sick to death of apologetics about immigration to the UK. It is destroying this country. We work, me and you, so a third of our income can be split off, pissed away on healthcare, hotel rooms, phones, trainers, disposable income for a bunch of economic chances from Albania or Egypt and elsewhere.
Beggars. Callum said beggars, and I think we should stick to that. It's a good word for it. They're beggars.
They haven't really asked me for money directly. That's the thing.
Well, they've taken it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So that I prefer chances or vagabonds. Look, I'm going to refuse to let liars that enable this get away with the narratives that they claim to be compassionate, but then make hard-working British people poorer and more alienated from the country that they woke up to and inherited, and one day realised, hey, doesn't even look like the place I used to live anymore. So we're going to talk about a bunch of those problems.
I don't want to derail, but I do often think to myself recently, when we talk about the country that we used to live in, the country that this used to be, how much longer can people like us even continue to frame it in such a way when, realistically speaking, the country that we're talking about was one that was long dead, well, that was, for me, dead the year after I was born, and for you died a few years before you were born. It's very difficult to consider, like, how can we even... obviously, we can claim the historical heritage of the country, but I always lived in a country when I would go to Manchester, and it was just a gigantic multicultural melting pot, and that's all I ever knew. It's just a shame. It's just a shame because that country that I hear so much about, that my parents were able to live in and everyone else was able to live in and enjoy the benefits of, was something I never got to experience.
Yeah, those bonds of cultural continuity have been severed long before our living memory. That's the thing. I may have been alive to see the first influx of Tony Blair's 1997 migration wave, but I don't necessarily remember it. And so we'd quite like to reclaim that past. So can these apologists stop getting in the way, please? Speaking of fictional nations where multiculturalism may sort of work, unless you're being attacked by an invading army of robots who are cannibalizing your culture. Oh, wait. Almost like it's outside. Go over to subscribe to the website. You can watch John Wheatley and I discuss the politics of Mass Effect. Let's hope our country has a far better ending than number 3, shall we?
I was going to say, I've never really played Mass Effect, but I am aware of one thing, which is that there's a number of genocides in Mass Effect, isn't there? Yes. Some of which are up to you, the player.
Yes, you can prevent them. So let's do that, shall we? I also wanted to just say that if everyone crossing the dinghies in the channel were bright blue alien snoo ladies, then I might consider taking in some refugees. Let's go over to
bloody hell.
Some actual colonialism, shall we? So on Saturday, thousands of Albanian protesters, I'm going to call them invaders, because they are, because of what they're doing.
And they don't have any right to be here, so...
No, they occupied outside Downing Street, and Parliament. You can see Westminster Square here, Big Ben, and they're all just walking across with signs, flags, having a jolly at our expense, blocking traffic. If we can go over to the next one, they've also blocked Westminster Bridge. They've completely stopped anyone going across it, waving flags. They're calling everyone racist. They're complaining about Suella Braverman, saying to throw her out. And then they had the gall to walk up to the following. If we go to this one, if you aren't upset at this is shocking. They've draped the Albanian flag around the Churchill statue directly opposite the Houses of Parliament. Now, it's fair to say that if you take a broad historical perspective, Churchill is emblematic of our war victory, of course. He wasn't perfect. He caused Gallipoli. Lots of men died in the First World War. He had some stolen valour. He was wearing an RAF uniform when he never even served. He did hand over expat Poles, Soviet defectors back to Stalin as part of a deal when he knew the Gulags existed. However, they are decorating that with their flag because they know that is a cultural touchstone for England. They know that during the BLM riots, for example, it had to be covered up because that was one of the main statues that was going to be targeted. There were fights around it. So this is emblematic of what the English think of themselves. What the British, more broadly, perhaps, but specifically the English. And they have draped their flag around that as if they are colonising us, as if they are occupying our territory. This is victory for them. This is reprehensible.
Once again, I don't know any time or place outside of the modern West where any nation would be happy to see this happen and where it wouldn't be met with immediate and strong pushback from the local authorities. Like Carl's mentioned before, the cavalry charge. Why, when we've got this massive crowd of Albanians occupying our capital and protesting and defacing some of our national monuments, do we not have the cavalry charge gloriously rolling through and letting them know, this isn't your country, this is our country, we're in control here, you don't get to push us about?
The Mall is a short gallop up the way, And the only reason is there is a total lack of political will and a willingness to assert ourselves as a patriotic nation.
Is all of this because of the fact that I think either this year or last year we deported about 1,000 Albanians who had no right to be here?
No, within the last year we've only done about 400. And it's because Suella Braverman called it an invasion. We'll go through the statistics of
that's
an
it.
invasion.
That's all it was. It's just because they called it an invasion when they're literally coming over on dinghies to sell drugs to our children.
Yes.
Brilliant.
So if we go to the next one, speaking of Albanian criminals, a convicted Albanian murderer held at Manston Processing Centre was jailed for entering the UK illegally, but has still been allowed to continue his asylum application. Mariglin Shoshari, I don't care if I got your name wrong, 31, arrived in Kent in October after the small boat he was crossing in was intercepted by the authorities, so he got ferried back over. He'd been convicted of murder and firearm offences in Greece in 2012 and given an 18-and-a-half-year prison sentence. Shoshari was brought ashore and taken to the former Ministry of Defence site in Thanet, which has been turned into an asylum seeker processing centre. On the processing form he filled in, he admitted his previous crimes and was charged with entering the UK illegally and jailed yesterday for 60 days. But at the court hearing, the court also heard Shoshari had applied for asylum in this country on October 12th, 2 days after his arrival, and that his application would continue.
This is just how useless our asylum system is, and why whenever I hear people talking about, they have to come over on the dinghies because there's no other way for them to get, we force them to become criminals. No, we don't. You can literally be a murderer and still claim asylum here. No questions. Oh, well, we don't want to offend the feelings of the poor murderers.
Well, you could be the exact kind of people that someone could be fleeing, and still you are allowed in. So let's go to some facts, shall we? Small boat crossings from the Albanians. Now, I've gone over this before in a previous segment, but I'll just condense it here, just to keep hammering the point home that these people do not deserve our sympathy. They deserve to be ejected from our country post-haste. From May to September 2022, Albanian nationals alone comprised 42% of small boat crossings. 11,102 Albanians arrived by small boats in those 5 months. Over the whole of 2021, there were a total of 815 Albanian nationals, so that's nearly another 10,000 people increase, not percentage. In some weeks over the summer, more than half of small boat arrivals claim to be Albanian. Reminder, Albania is a safe country, it's a NATO member, people go on holiday there, and under Section 94 of the Nationality, Immigration and Asylum Act, they should not be granted asylum because they're not at war. There's some slight economic downturn, but that's because they've elected a socialist party. They should not have a case for asylum. And yet, 7,627 Albanians claimed asylum in the UK, more than double the number in the preceding year, although very few of the small boat arrivals will have their asylum application considered at this point. We'll come on to that point later. We know that Albanians more generally have been less likely to be granted asylum than other nationalities, with the current grant rate at 53% compared to 76% for all other nationalities. So you're letting in over half. Why? Why are you letting in any at all? Only 14% of Albanian males were only 14% of Albanian males whose cases concluded in the last year were granted protection, whereas for women and children, the rate was 90%. However, most Albanians crossing in small boats were male. From 2018 to June 2022, 95% were male. So they're saying, we're letting the women and children in because they're being trafficked. Okay, if they're being trafficked, sure, but you're creating a perverse incentive to traffic people. And also, why are you letting in any men at all? And during the time at which you're waiting to process their asylum claims, we're putting them up in hotels for £7 million a day.
And they control our cocaine business.
Yeah, well, there is that. If we go on to the next one, the reason this is happening, in part, is because the BBC are manufacturing consent by putting plants in the question time audience, because they're overwhelmingly stacked recently with NHS staff and a bunch of lefties. Dimwits like this keep this going on. I'm going to subject you to this woman who only holds these opinions because she's remotely good looking.
Do I have to?
Yeah, because our audience have to.
I'm really bored of hearing about the kind of low-level stuff that MPs are doing, like Matt Hancock being in the jungle. I just don't care. What I'm more concerned about is the fact that we have a Home Secretary who last week referred to refugees, people fleeing war, conflict, as an invasion. I think it's really important to say that they are not illegal. Nobody is illegal. When they land on our shores, they claim asylum. There is no such thing. And actually, the things that your government are doing are a breach to the 1951 Refugee Convention and the 1948 Human Rights Declaration. I can't remember which one. One of those, we were a signing signatory, and it came after the horrors of the Holocaust. And the fact that we look at these people from Iraq, Eritrea, Albania, and just so we remember, 76% of claims end in a positive outcome, and a further 50% of the remainder also end in a positive outcome. We spend so much time talking about these people that quite frankly shouldn't be in their jobs, and it's a joke that they are. And we waste time talking about them rather than actually talking about the things that people in this government are doing that is harmful, whipping up hatred. And that is what I'm really cross about. I don't care if Matt Hancock wants to do something. I couldn't care less. It's taking up pointless airtime.
Oh, she goes on a bit.
I know,
but
they're giving that airtime. They are not stopping her. They interrupt each other. They interrupt the other panelists. They're all nodding in agreement, politely, quietly, as if she has any legitimacy to what she's saying.
Also, just the things that she was saying. Obviously, she manages to just off the top of her head bring up random acts that we were signing back in the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah.
All right. If that's supposed to come across natural. And then she's like, oh, but she's got the exact percentage points ready, just off the top of her head for when she's talking about how many asylum applications are granted to people. One, why should I trust the asylum system to even be making the right decisions there for who should and shouldn't be coming into the country when all I need to do is just look around us and say it's just a joke. And another point to the whole being stacked, when I was at university, I was doing a media degree at Media City in Salford. Right next door to that, in the same little square of buildings, was the BBC headquarters for the North, where they did lots of filming for things like Jeremy Kyle, and they did lots of filmings for stuff like this, question time things. And I, along with everybody else on the course, constantly got emails saying the audience isn't full enough, would you like a free place? So I would not be surprised if Question Time and all these other places are just sending out emails to overwhelmingly leftist university courses and media courses saying, would you like a free spot on this?
Wouldn't be shocked. Also, the reason I bring this up is because outside of our little bubble online, where we get exposed to these kinds of narrative-breaking facts, you got to remember that the diminished audience of politically plugged-in normies do watch things like Question Time. They do have their worldview filtered through to them. For example, the BBC's already pre-clipped this, and so they are indoctrinated into this because they believe that this is public perception. The BBC are manufacturing consent.
Well, more important than just your average pleb on the street who watches something like that and believes it, that's the sort of programming that all of the sorts of people that I was going to university with. These people, some of the people I went to university with, are slowly working their way up the ranks of channels like Channel 4. So the elites, the future elites who are going to be organising and running these institutions are, as you would always expect, being indoctrinated into these worldviews.
And the MPs, staffers and researchers all within the Westminster bubble lap this up, hence why there's so many wet Tories, and we'll excoriate some of those later. Just some more stats. Just to correct her on this, the UK has one of the highest refugee status acceptance rates, whether or not people are actually refugees, like Albanians. It's not 76% as the prior page claimed. This one says 81. So 81% of refugee claimants get accepted. And they can also have repeat appeals, partially because, of course, they say, oh, I'm Christian, so I'm persecuted, because the Church of England keeps encouraging them to convert to bolster their numbers up.
And hence you suddenly end up with 2% of Albanian male population in the UK.
Exactly. Speaking of population, let's go over to the recent census data, shall we? On Census Day, the 21st of March 2021, the size of the usual resident population in England and Wales was 59,597,542. This was the largest population ever recorded through a census in England and Wales. So Americans, if you can imagine about a quarter of your country packed into a space smaller than the state of Michigan, and that's currently what we're facing, and more are coming every day. Sometimes up to 1,000 people in small boats crossing the channel. So you think your southern border is bad, imagine a much smaller space with a much higher population density. If we can go over to the next one, the reason this is happening in this article actually admits that, if you scroll to point 4, please, John, migration has been the main driver of population growth since the 1990s. So we're in a sub-replacement birth rate. In 2020, obviously because of virus of unnamed origin, the UK experienced a natural change of negative 8,069 to its live births and deaths record. So even though 52%, I believe, of women over 30 have no children, our population keeps going up. And it's because the adult population keeps increasing because we're importing people en masse who, upon arrival, need things like housing. if you can go over to Lotus Eaters, you can watch this, my first podcast, funnily enough, with the company, just to see all the housing stats. But just to briefly break it down to you, we have about 200,000 homes and apartments every year. Some of those are given to students. Net 375,000 minimum increase of permanent residents every year. And the native population is sub-replacement birth rate, but the replacement birth rate of migrants is way, way up. So we're literally just building houses for our colonising foreigners.
My goodness, could you say we're being replaced? Or would that be an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory for some reason?
God knows. If we go over to the next one, we also see that we have to pay for it. I'm going to force you to listen to Jeremy Hunt, our wonderfully appointed, definitely not Chinese compromise Chancellor. Take it away.
We are going to see everyone paying more tax. We're going to see spending cuts. But I think it's very important to say that we are a resilient country. I think that, as Simon Sharma would say, we've faced bigger challenges in our history in the past. And we're also a compassionate country. So we will introduce a plan that will see us through the very choppy waters that we're in economically, but we'll make sure that we protect the most vulnerable, and in particular deal with the single biggest worry for people on low incomes, which is the rising cost of their weekly shop and rising energy prices. And economically, that makes sense too, because as Paul Johnson was saying, inflation is much higher than it should be, and that is destabilising people's family finances, as well as being very bad for businesses in the economy.
We'll come to that later, but explicitly at the outset, people are going to lose some of their public services, and everyone you say is going to pay more tax. So everyone is going to notice the consequences from the decisions you're going to announce on Thursday.
I think people will notice, because these are difficult decisions, but they will also see there's a plan to get through this.
So, just a reminder, he signed on to a multi-trillion-pound climate reparations model for Kenya, Somalia, and Pakistan, and also he was one of the ones who endorsed the massive amount of furlough money printing and spending which got us into this recession in the first place. So don't be gaslit into believing that it's Putin's war in Ukraine, or that immigration has no impact whatsoever on the state of our public finances.
Modern politics works on a crisis-to-crisis basis. You can never not be in a crisis, because what do crises do? They mean that you have to give more and more power to government bureaucrats.
Yep. Speaking of crisis, if you look at our foreign aid spending cap, we've actually breached this because the budget is being used on asylum seekers. Spending is currently set at 0.5% of national income, around 11 billion. The BBC has learned that Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is expected to admit that there will be an overspend of 1 billion or so in the next 3 years, pushing aid spending to an estimated 0.55%. So it's because there are so many people trafficking themselves over, and I say themselves because they're paying like it's a holiday company to come over from Albania through Brussels, through France, and straight to the UK and be a Deliveroo driver by the night time, that our government budget is being blown out the backside, and we have to foot the bill for this just because we're responsible working people. Let's look over to the PM in waiting, shall we? Keir Starmer once pushed for migrants to get more taxpayer cash for their legal appeals if their first asylum claim failed. So not only do you stay in the country, not only do you put up with bed and board, but you get an endless revolving door of lawyers, because of course he's friends with all the Blairite human rights lawyers, because he himself was one. Do you remember a few years ago when Keir Starmer said that immigration should be lowered during the Brexit campaign? Go over to the next one, please, John. He actually broke with the Labour Party on this. And now we just see that the linguistic slide, the Overton window, has completely changed to encompass both parties pushing for mass migration and open borders.
I've just realised something.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer looks like he could be Richard Spencer's dad.
Yes.
I think that explains Labour's positions on certain peoples.
Well, that's why their front bench is overwhelmingly Anglo-Saxon. If we go to the next one, the Conservatives will try and gaslight you into believing that they've done a new channel migrant deal with France. So we're paying the French another £63 million to increase their officers' numbers by 40%, patrolling the Calais border. The UK's annual contribution to policing the border is set to rise from around 54 million to the equivalent of just above 63 million. Britain has already paid 175 million to France to police the channel border since 2018, and look what's that's got us. Oh, an exponential increase in the amount of lawbreakers. Robert Jenrick, who's an MP, has vowed to put a stop to Hotel Britain, which has seen taxpayers fork out over £6.8 million a day to put migrants in unsuitable accommodation. So that works out to about £2.5 billion per year. So what is the reason, if we keep paying the French, that it doesn't stop? Let's go over to the next one. Tory Lord, also the boss of Next, which is a department store in the UK, has given this interview to the BBC, and I'm just going to have to put you through it, I'm afraid.
We have got people queuing up to come to this country to pick crops that are rotting in fields, to work in warehouses that otherwise wouldn't be operable, and we're not letting them in. And we have to take a different approach to economically productive migration. We have to control immigration, but we have to control it in such a way that benefits our economy rather than cripples it.
You were a pro-Brexit business person, not that, and perhaps in a slight minority in that sense. You got growth is down, taxes are rising, trade has fallen very significantly. Was this the Brexit you wanted?
I think in respect of immigration, it's definitely not the Brexit that I wanted, or indeed many of people who voted Brexit, but more importantly, the vast majority of the country. And we have to remember, we're all stuck in this Brexit argument. We have to remember that what post-Brexit Britain looks like is not the preserve of those people who voted Brexit. It's for all of us to decide. And when you look at the majority of people in Britain, I think they have a very pragmatic view to immigration. Yes, control it where it's damaging to society, but let people in who can contribute.
No, people want to massively lower immigration. That's why they voted Brexit. And this is the break between the populace and the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party who wanted Brexit, like Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, thought of global Britain. Like he said there, it's not the Britain we wanted for immigration. That's why you wanted immigration to increase from all around the world, not just the EU.
Well, sad to say, he is a businessman who wants to pay his staff less, probably.
Yeah, he wants a permanently low-wage underclass to exist in the UK. And it doesn't matter if they're economically productive on the broad scale of GDP, bar graph go up, it's diminishing GDP per capita, making each person poorer, lowering the opportunity ceiling, and it's cultural battery acid.
Thinking about it, what he's asking for is essentially some form of caste system.
Yeah. There's also the ASDA chairman who said basically the same thing on Question Time. I'm going to put you through his waffle as well. And I'm sorry, it's demoralising, but we do have to listen to the exact kind of attitudes the ruling class have for you. It's contempt.
The immigration has been around for thousands of years. There's been immigration. People come here. Mostly it's economic migration because people who have got no food, no water, no education, no prospects for their children, and no way of bettering themselves want to come to a better place. My father was an immigrant to this country. My mother was an immigrant to this country. I probably wouldn't get in today, or they probably wouldn't.
Good.
So let's not knock it. We've done that. People have come here from persecution, political persecution. We've had people in the Pale of Russia. We've had the Huguenots. We've had the Ugandans. We've had the Syrians. We've had everybody here. Now we've got these people. Now, there's always in that migration people who are going to game the system. But we have to be, if we're a caring, rich country, and we're apparently the 5th largest economy in the world, even with our recession.
I think it's 6th now, but yeah.
6th. But we have to accept that it's part of our duty. The world is changing. The world isn't from 1945. It's not 1955. It's 2023.
It's
and we either live in this country and accept that's what it does, or we go somewhere else. But you can't stop it. Now, what I don't like the way that we're dealing with it. I don't like the rhetoric. I don't like the fact that, the Home Secretary is standing there. He goes to Manston today in a Chinook helicopter. What sort of message does that send to anybody? Are we starting a war with these people down in Manston? How do we ever allow the person to do that? How could she speak with such dangerous language about a problem? And you made the point, and several others have made it, and gentlemen there made it. This will only be solved by negotiation. And it will only be solved by people sitting around a table as everything is solved.
Well, they clearly think they're at war with us because they're draping flags around our war monuments.
Well, yeah, I hate the lies. The framing of that whole thing was so, disingenuous. The idea that just because England has had migration in the past means it's in any way comparable to what we're experiencing today in the era of mass migration. Like I just got it up, he mentioned the Huguenots. So, well, we got a bunch of French Protestants moving from France to a English Protestant country, therefore much better and much more able to integrate into the local population. And also, we only took in about 50,000 of those.
And we were their neighbour, rather than bunch of countries over, a remote island, and you're just here to take my money. Go away, please.
They just ignore that most of the immigration that used to happen before the 20th century was more along the, well, we need skilled workers, so we'll take in a very limited number of skilled workers.
Have you considered, though, that not having open borders is holding the world back from being economically prosperous, Harry?
Oh, I was hoping you were going to say racist.
Oh, if we go to the Financial Times, this guy who's the founder and chief executive of Climate Alpha and author of Move, How Mass Migration Will Reshape the World and What It Means for You, which sounds like a threat. He says, in the West, infrastructure is decaying and we lack the labour to rebuild it. Our elderly are perishing without enough medical staff. Home values will sag amid depressed demand, and stagflation will persist as frictions rise in accessing cheap labour and resources. So he's claiming all that. Record visas, though, still isn't working. Here we are. So we gave out over 2 million visas last year. 330,233 of those were work-related. In the year ending June 2022, there were 486,868 sponsored study visas, so student visas, mainly from China. And then there were also 305,553 visas granted for family reasons, so chain migration. Then there were 63,089 asylum applications. Again, 81% of those were accepted. So 2 million visas for working, studying, family, and still, for some reason, we don't have enough labour to meet demand. Do we think there might be a reason, for example, when the Bangladeshi Caterers Association were lobbying for higher immigration at their awards dinner, that more immigration might mean more demand for services, and so there is an endless self-justification for having more staff to meet these non-necessary services like catering or supermarkets or security, because lots of trouble is caused at public events, but we can't possibly say that now, can we? So if we look at the employment figures, who could possibly fill these jobs? Oh, it might be the millions of British, the 1.58 million people who are currently on benefits after the pandemic, because there's only 1.2 million job vacancies, and the 1.58 million could probably fill some of those.
And a lot of this is something that's been recorded across many well-off nations since the end of the pandemic, which is that a lot of people are just deciding to leave work behind if they know that they can. The government played its hand. They said, well, you don't need to work, and we can just hand you £1,000.
Yeah.
We can just give you all of this money to just stay at
Universal
work.
basic income.
Yeah, we can give you a universal basic income. So a lot of people have decided, well, if that's the case, I don't need to work. I can just stay at home. Something that could fix this would be, for instance, if there was less labour competition in your local area, meaning that prices for labour weren't being pushed down. If you got offered more money to go and work than you do get offered money to stay at home and do nothing. Yeah. But once again, that would mean actually raising people's wages.
I've seen complaints of saying, sometimes they're offering £20 to £30 an hour to go and pick fruit. And it's like, right, okay, do you think the reason British people might be staying at home and not doing those jobs is because they know if they sit at home long enough, they will get paid anyway, and the migration argument will be open the borders again and let the Albanians, Romanians, whoever elseans come do it for us. If you shut off that valve for cheap, low-skilled migration labour, people will actually start having to do these jobs, and they might just have a lower demand because there'll be less population density in the country that you have to redirect more and more resources to.
I notice as well there seems to be a big splotch of red around unadjusted claimant rate around the south of just above the Midlands right there. That seems to correlate with places like the Greater Manchester area, for instance, which has quite a lot of migration come to it. There's also a nice big splodge of red around that London area as well.
Yeah,
big surprise.
It turns out that migrants, generally speaking, a higher rate to population claim benefits and don't pay into systems. Shock. So if we can go to the next one, get more lay press. Just Kate Andrews of The Telegraph, she's a Spectator economics editor, saying the average Eastern European migrant contributes £1,000 more each year in net terms to the Treasury's coffer than the average UK-born adult. This shows how valuable these workers are to getting Britain back on track. Just wanted to fact check this with the Oxford Migration Observatory. So if we go to the next one, the net fiscal contribution of European migrants in the financial year of 2016 to 17 was 4.7 billion. However, it was at a net cost of 9 billion for non-European migrants. And how many of those do we keep letting in? Oh, that's right. Well, about 50% before the Albanians came over of all the boat migrants were Iranian. And before their revolution, I don't happen to remember there being a war going on. I just happen to remember it's a shit country. So if you want to kick out those people and then you just want temporary seasonal visas coming over and then they can leave rather than overstaying, we can have that conversation. Oh, wait, you don't want to kick out those people either, do you? No. So go away. Right, let's go on to the so-called Conservatives, shall we, before we wrap this segment up. Tom Harwood, of course, as per usual, doesn't understand why people are ailing in the polls. He's saying the Tory party, well, they're just hemorrhaging votes. I wonder if it's because of taxes and domestic energy generation. And Stephen Edgington, the base gentleman over at The Telegraph, he decided to reply to Tom in the next one, please, John, and said they keep the borders open, and Tom just says, keeps them open. We have a labour shortage right now, and very much not open borders. If you can just scroll down, please, John, so we can read this exchange. Stephen says, 1.1 million visas issued last year and 40,000 illegal immigrants is open borders, in my opinion, and Tom just continues to deny it. So we just have midwits Absolute midwits. Open borders means no immigration control. De facto, we have no immigration control with 81% acceptance rates for people who are not coming from war zones. You midwit.
I don't think he's a midwit. I think he's an actively subversive element in the so-called right wing.
Well, I'd like to quite go on GB News, so I don't want to attribute to malice what could be stupidity.
Well,
I
suppose you might run into him backstage.
I'm hoping. I would love to debate the man on it sometime.
Sure he'd run into
Speaking of people I've tried to engage with, this little segment that Callum and I did on the Gen Z Conservatives in Revolt at Jess Gill's Reasoned UK event last week, Steve Baker was there and got heckled by a bunch of young conservatives, including Elizabeth, who asked him, why are you supporting drag queen Storia and the like in your constituency? Why aren't you taking a tougher stance on migration? I decided to take a clip of this and talk about migration. If we can go to the next one, just tweet it at him. If we can scroll down, John, just to the quote retweeted part that I did. I just sent that to him and just said, if you're confused, and yes, I admit I did call him an imbecile at the start. I was a bit impassioned, so that's probably my fault. But I did say, I feel a bit desperate because I feel like I've been involuntarily politicised because you guys have had the floodgates open for 12 years. I never voted on this policy, and I can't have much of a family or a home anytime soon because I'm going to try valiantly, but it doesn't look economically viable. And I said, if you want to understand why young people don't like you very much and are frustrated, here's a video. Steve was following me beforehand. About an hour after I tweeted this out, he just unfollowed me. So if we can just scroll up, John. I'm just going to say proof positive. Again, conservatives, even the one that you think are on our sides, they don't care. They don't give a damn. They do not want to listen to you. And I have had someone point out that, obviously some people said about his WEF connections, but he's denied that, and you can read his tweets in the description. I'm not going to bother wittering on it about that, but I have had someone who said he has spoken to Steve, and Steve is very worried about the fact that he's had mass Pakistani immigration to his constituency. It's now marginal, and he's likely to be voted out next time. So you absolute cuckold, why instead of stopping the replacement of the demographic within your constituency and lowering migration, why are you trying to fight a losing battle and allowed people in because now you're going to get ousted? You utter dimwit. You could have helped us, you didn't. And so I don't care if you are voted out and lose your mortgage, your career. I do not give a damn. We tried warning you and you didn't listen. I have nothing but contempt for you. And so I'll just finish with, hurry up, Nige. Quarter of people said that they would especially defect from the Conservatives or just vote for you outright because you're the only one willing to control immigration. So
we need
please.
The Nigel Farage mono party.
Well, can he just re-inherit Reform UK and run it again as a single-issue party? The low immigration party. The I will sit on the cliffs of Dover with an air rifle puncturing dinghies party. Give us some hope.
I'll volunteer for that.
Look, I'm furious. You're furious. Question is, are we going to do something about it? Will one of the elites please give us an option? God help us.
Yeah.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Epoch series, this one on the armistice of the First World War. If you'd like to find out what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.